This is Every New Day, and welcome back to NTV News. From Alaska to the White House, we unpack the unfolding saga in US-Russia-Ukraine diplomacy. What started in the icy wilderness of Alaska escalated to a high-stakes White House showdown. Different meetings, one war, and a lot of mixed signals. Let's unpack the Alaska summit, the White House sessions with Zelenskyy, and the EU angle, and the rumors swirling around them. And after our report, I present my own concluding view on this entire situation. On August 15th of this year, 2025, President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin met at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Anchorage, Alaska. Their first in-person meeting since the Russia-Ukraine conflict started in 2022. The summit began with military fanfare, red carpet, flyovers, and ritualistic pomp. No signed deal though, but it kicked off a week of frantic diplomacy. Big revelations and tensions emerged though. Multiple outlets say Russia floated a ceasefire concept centered on Ukraine, withdrawing from remaining parts of Donetsk and Luhansk, in exchange for freezing the current lines in the south, terms Kiev has rejected repeatedly. Trump dropped his ceasefire demand, whilst Putin's delegation reportedly offered territory swaps, limited concessions in exchange for recognition of Crimea and veto over NATO entry. There was security talk, Russian permits for NATO-style Article 5-like guarantees for Ukraine emerged. But critics slammed the optics, as they always do. Was it a win for Putin? Headlines labeled it a diplomatic coup. Security protocols even leaked. Secret documents printed in a hotel showing the summit schedule. Oh my. Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, told Fox News the Russians made concessions almost immediately in Alaska without giving specifics. That upbeat spin contrasts with reports that Moscow's core demands haven't budged. Commentary pieces blasted the Alaska optics and mixed messaging, framing it as improvised diplomacy. Opinions aren't facts, though, but they reflect the political headwinds the talks have faced. After Alaska, Trump shifted blame. He told Zelenskyy that achieving peace was now up to him, all while making clear Ukraine wouldn't be allowed to rejoin NATO or reclaim Crimea. Zelenskyy, rejecting any territorial compromise, announced he'd fly to Washington, accompanied by European leaders, demonstrating unified Western resolve. Of course, the usual suspects were there. Starmer, Macron, Merz were there alongside President von der Leyen. European powers insisted no deal without involving Ukraine, and certainly no extracting land without Kiev's consent. Security guarantees remained on the table, but red lines were clear. It was on Monday, 18th of August. Zelenskyy arrived at the White House. Trump, in a preemptive social media post, stressed Zelenskyy could end the war almost immediately by giving up NATO aspirations and Crimea, prompting global backlash. Inside the Oval Office, a tense exchange played out, invoking meaningful stakes, but no breakthrough emerged. The meeting moved to include European allies shortly after. The February Oval Office meeting between Trump and Zelenskyy earlier in the year was extraordinary and televised. Reporting from AP, LA Times, PBS described the heated exchange and the aborted minerals deal signing, and Zelenskyy leaving without an agreement. This is something we have previously covered on NTV. But by August 18th, the tone was calmer. Zelenskyy met Trump again alongside the European leaders, and Trump publicly floated security guarantees while ruling out US ground troops and hinting air support could be on the table. Path to peace? Still unclear. The media reactions of these two meetings varied. The Guardian warned the Alaska summit was a distraction. Others argued it emboldened Putin and fractured transatlantic unity. Some think it could even galvanize Western defense support for Ukraine. However, there were key points raised and remarked upon from the summit. There were clear territory no-go zones, such as Donbass and Crimea, as well as a no NATO pathway for Ukraine. However, security guarantees versus alliance membership were the talk on the table. On top of that, other takeaways were a focus from specifically the EU leaders on European solidarity, as well as the diplomatic risk currently in relation to this conflict versus the war fatigue, which is something that we've brought up a number of times. But what about the EU's role in all of this and the charm offensive? Well, Europe rushed into Washington meetings to keep Kiev's interests front and center, even as Trump pushed for a quick end to the war. Reporting frames this as a coordinated European charm offensive to prevent a deal on Moscow's terms. Separately, London's March 2025 summit, convened by UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, sought a European-led peace framework and long-term guarantees for Ukraine. The message: Europe will step up regardless of US turbulence. In parallel, Brussels has unveiled the Rearm Europe concepts. This is in relation to the current defense money and industry being pushed for the EU defense plan. EU mechanisms that could mobilize up to more or less 800 billion euros over several years for air defense, missiles, drones, and joint procurement. Analysts note, Germany and France could be major industrial beneficiaries as defense becomes an economic pillar now amid a weak cycle for the automotive sector as well as others. There has been talk of troops as well. As talks turned to a European peacekeeping presence, German military voices warned, don't be naive. Any credible mission means tens of thousands of troops for years. So what about the consequences and scenarios in relation to all of this? Well, firstly, there is the possibility of a freeze or ceasefire with guarantees. That means security guarantees without NATO membership. Possible US air cover, but no US ground troops. Russia rejects NATO troop deployment, whilst Kiev wants guarantees before any Putin meeting. The markets, of course, eye defense stocks. Not surprising. Implications? Well, there will be lower intensity fighting, big verification burden over all of this, with long-term European troop aid commitments. On the other hand, there's a grand bargain with territorial trade. Reported Russian outline projects Ukraine cedes Donetsk, Luhansk. Russia freezes elsewhere. Kiev says no, and EU leaders fear signaling weakness invites future aggression. it's also hard to legitimize under its constitution, and the risk of peace now and war later. Finally, the talks of collapse or the war just continues. The EU will accelerate its rearmament and industry, whilst the US role narrows to air and aid, whilst Russia will just harden its positions further. Simultaneously, hard diplomatic pressure is emerging from Ukraine to hold elections. Trump's envoy, Keith Kellogg, said that elections need to be done, especially following a ceasefire. Yet, Ukraine's constitutional framework and martial law present formidable legal barriers to elections. Both law and public opinion, backed by polls showing 60 to 80% opposition to wartime voting, have delayed any plans. Furthermore, lawmakers reaffirmed that no election can take place until after martial law ends, calling any push for wartime voting illegitimate. This battle between democratic norms and wartime necessities lays bare critical tensions, external demands versus domestic legalities. The political climate and the implications for Zelenskyy. Well, at home, Zelenskyy faces both political and legal headwinds. Accusations of power consolidation amid a corruption backlash have eroded confidence amongst the Ukrainian public. Meanwhile, Trump and other GOP officials have questioned Zelenskyy's legitimacy, some even suggesting his removal or replacement via elections. With rumors of exile swirling and mounting election pressure, legitimate or otherwise, Ukraine remains a geopolitical flashpoint. So what to watch for next? Whether Zelenskyy and Putin actually meet, well, Russia now says it's prepared while questioning Zelenskyy's legitimacy. Kiev wants security guarantees first. The definitions of these security guarantees, though, come down to who pays, who enforces, and whether troops, air, cover materialize. As for the EU financing, well, there's movement on the more or less 800 billion euro defense plan, which contracts land in Germany, France, versus other EU states. In closing, Europe says it wants peace, but one that deters the next invasion. Alaska set the stage. The White House kept talks alive. Now the EU's money and manpower will determine whether guarantees are real or just words. And why is the EU pushing to contend further the possibility of no ceasefire or an end to this entire conflict? Well, some think perhaps this could be due to the push by the greater European powers to bolster militarization and develop the European military-industrial complex, as we've posted before in a video, all supposedly for the EU defense plan. But as we all know, when there is defense, it is more so double talk for mobilizing offensive factors. We've seen this throughout history. Ironic given that the European project of the EU was designed and developed primarily to maintain peace within the continent. My take is that the final decision should come down to the overwhelming majority of citizens both on the Russian and Ukrainian fronts who are fed up with this war and at the front lines being caught up in it. Not to mention a vast majority of European citizens who have more pressing concerns than footing more towards a bill to push for arms to assist in killing other people who are not part of the EU. In the end, it seems the war industry may continue to move ahead regardless of what the people essentially need or want. So in the end, what does it all mean? Well, the Alaska summit didn't yield peace, but laid bare the power dynamics. Trump's shift put heavy pressure on Ukraine. Zelenskyy pushed back with Europe at his back. If there's a lesson, diplomacy without inclusion or credibility fails. The road ahead is murky. Negotiating peace amid live fighting, deep mistrust, and geopolitical rivalry. Share your thoughts down below. Comment. What is the US strategy really aiming for? Is the EU really prepared for peace? Or is this just an excuse for them to push their military-industrial complex plans? If you like this video, please help us by liking, thumbs up, and subscribe to stay updated. This was NTV.